Long ago, you had the kingdom of One Hope, today now known as Old Hope and New Hope. But before we get into 10,000 years of rushed history, let's talk about elves in our world. So elves are not like, they have Fey ancestry. Now, how they reach this world is different depending on what elf you talk to. For example, the ones of Old Hope and New Hope can direct some of their lineage back to the two elven brothers known as Judica and Brudica. Brudica and Judica Hope were orphans found in a village, lived there, became charismatic, worked as gods and laborers for the longest time until they want to set on their own. They wanted to find a homeland for their people, and after traveling, doing some mercenary work, scouring, they found this beautiful land, great trees, some swamp, and they continued on the journey around, and they found at one point a dwarven technomancers is what they used in their writings, but in a sense they would take a dwarf who had died and shove them into machinery and keep them working. Necromancers a bit harsh, but nonetheless they defeated these, dastardly foes, and soon they took two of the landmasses, one for each of them, and ruled as twin kings, and things were peaceful. They settled down, they fought off invasion, not 5 years into their rule, from the pirate king known as Jambar the Black, who, gave them a run for their money navally, but on land, Judica and Brudica had them beat, and after 2 years of skirmishing, finally, the pirate gave in to their demands and left, and has since never been heard of to history again. He could have just remained a pirate or retired from the pirating life as a whole. Now, with being twin brothers, they had different wives and had children, and quickly Judica and Brudica knew that this new kingdom they had founded, and therefore their descendants, would fall into war at some point. I mean, they got along, but it doesn't mean that their children would get along. So they devised a plan to keep succession crises to a minimum once they had passed, and that was done with the Treaty of Blood. Now, the Treaty of Blood is, not too hard to explain. Pretty much they agreed that Judica's line would come first, and then if someone from Judica's line could not rule, then Brudica's line would be next. Now, the test to prove who could be right to rule was kind of complex, and that's what the brothers wanted. First, you would have to be able to show that you can have children by having some children already, or, have a magical test to show you're fertile. You don't want a sterile king. Next, you would have to have had at least 2 sons if you already had children, but if not, you had to be able to have a son within at least 6 years of taking the throne. If not, then you would have to step down and move either to the next member of your line or to the next family's line. Now, quickly, there was animosity amongst Judica's branch and Brudica's branch, just because, look, everyone wants to rule in some name or shape, and some of that was done through the wives as well, wanting their children to rule instead of another line. So quickly, it did not take long for the first conflict to happen. Now, this conflict came about after Judica and Brudica went back to a decrepit village they had been born and raised in as orphans, and decided that after 800 years of living, it was time to retire, and they did not want one to grieve for the other, so they both agreed that they would take poison, sit in their old ancient home, and die together, with their only witness being a wizard by the name of Akur that they had met while in their travels. So, one day, in an autumn wind, both Judica and Brudica sat down, informed their family of their plan, had picked out the heir, and then went and entered into the afterlife together as brothers, as they always wished. Now, it did not take long for a conflict to arise. Not 200 years after the brothers died, the heir to the kingdom, which was from Judica's line, known as Judica II, came into conflict with not his cousin, but his own brother, who had wished to take the throne from him, and attempted to assassinate him one afternoon at a banquet. And this started the first war, the War of Brothers. There will be a couple of War of Brothers, so we will not cover every War of the Brothers, but the first War of the Brothers is quite significant because then it caused a new change in succession law. Now, at this point, it came down to who had royal blood and who had the strongest amount of royal blood. And this indirectly caused a series of issues with Boudicca's line, because they knew that quickly from Judica's line, all of them then became cousins and were no longer sons or brothers. So their blood would be lesser, so it would be harder for them to have any claim to the heirs apparent or to be members unless all of Judica's branch died. Now, because of this, a couple of more power-hungry members of Boudicca's line started to marry into Judica's line, which didn't cause a lot of genetic issues right away, but it didn't take long until the family was looking for more branches to the tree, if you would. So quickly, a plan was devised that after they could merge the family lines to avoid, there were roughly 32 War of Brothers, and then near the end of the Reign of Brother Wars, New One Hope decided it would be better if they just merged the family together. So after about 2,000 years of political marriages and intrigue, we finally had the one line, which decided to keep the name Hope and united once and for all the lines of Boudica and Judica. Now, you still have some members that existed that were from both lines, and they didn't like that. But they had been barred from having children that could reign. So while they did keep having children and living in One Hope, their children would no longer be a part of the family line, which caused some issues later down the line. But for the topic of today's video, we will discuss what happened once the family was merged officially. Once the line had officially been merged and the ruling line was now decided and planned out, then became the issues of a labor force. Quickly, with so many nobles running around, not everyone was wishing to get their hands dirty, if you would. So quickly, a slave trade had emerged, which Judica and Boudica were not against. They owned many a slave in their days, both ruling and before taking One Hope. But quickly, a rule became that an elf could not be a slave, which was fine, for the elves, but then that kind of limited who they could grab. But, no one said nothing about a half-elf. Now, hey, I ran out of time and ate a part 2.